في هذه الجلسة المهمة في المؤتمر الدولي الخامس للاعاقة والتأهيل. أشكر للمنظمين المؤتمر والقائمين عليه في مركز الملك سلمان لإبحاث الإعاقة اختياري لرئاسة هذه الجلسة التي تتحدث عن موضوعات مهمة عن ذوي التوحد والصم، ومع هذه النخبة المميزة من المتحدثين والفائزين بجائزة الملك سلمان لإبحاث الإعاقة. نبدأ مع المتحدث الأول في هذه الجلسة وهو السيد سكوت باديسش، الرئيس التنفيذي لجمعية التوحد الأمريكية، وهي أقدم وأكبر منظمة للتوحد في أمريكا. حول السيد سكوت باديسش هذه المنظمة بصفته الرئيس التنفيذي لها إلى منظمة وطنية رائدة في دعم الاحتياجات اليومية للأفراد المتأثرين بالتوحد من خلال الخدمات القائمة على النتائج ودعم هذه الفئة. حصل السيد باديسش على العديد من الجوائز وشهادات التقدير لعمله. حصل على درجة الماجستير في الآداب من جامعة شيكاغو وشهادة البكالوريوس في الآداب من جامعة إلينوي. متزوج وله 4 أبناء. ابنه الأكبر مصاب بالتوحد ويعيش بشكل مستقل ويعمل في ابريل بولاية كولين الشمالية. الورقة التي يقدمها السيد باديسش بعنوان التقاطع بين القطاعين الخاص والعام وغير الحكومي في دعم احتياجات الأفراد والأسر المتأثرة بالتوحد. تفضل سيد باديسش، لك من الوقت 20 دقيقة.
Is it possible for you to put this up here? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for making all of us really so welcome in this wonderful country. I've been asked to talk about what happens when you bring the private sector, the public sector, and non-government agencies together to address issues. And for the purpose of my presentation, I would like to talk more about how it relates to autism, but it certainly can relate to any disability. Is everybody here to bring it back up? As mentioned in the introduction, I'm with the Autism Society of America, which is in the United States of America, the largest grassroots organization. And our mission is to maximize the quality of life of each individual's autism. And we do that in a way that we assure and want to create a society and a world where every person with autism is assured the highest dignity in all they do. We also believe very strongly that no one service works for everyone, so that people should have options. We are a highly inclusive organization, and we also work through 83 local affiliates who serve on a daily basis thousands of people that are in the country of America. We also measure success on how well someone increases their quality of life. For the purpose of this presentation, quality of life means that when we provide services to someone, we want them to be more self-sufficient, independent, have better health, find a job, be able to socialize, communicate, and also, to the best of their ability, advocate for themselves. We get our job done through programs we provide, advocacy, awareness, and partnerships. Last year, we served 360,000 people and provide information to over 670,000 people. And we do that, as I mentioned, through partnerships with government and other nonprofits in the private sector. In America, there is 1.5 million nonprofit organizations. They range anywhere from religious to universities to programs like ours to civic leagues and other organizations. So when you look at the intersection of private, public, and non-government, you start with 1.5 million, and that number continues to grow every day. In America, the federal government, when you deal with our federal government, you're talking with 137 independent agencies and 260 units within that agency and another 430 departments. So you're talking about something that is both massive and at times very confusing. In America, like you have, most countries have provinces or regions. We have 40 state governments. So when we talk about the public sector, we're talking about the federal government and the state government, where there's 50 state governments that we have to deal with. So as an organization at a national level, how we work with each state is often different because of rules and different efforts. And then it goes down to another level, which in a lot of countries could be considered the local councils. In America, there's 89,004 local government units and 119,522 cities and 37,203 special districts. So you can see we're dealing with a very, very large partnership, and at times no two are ever wanting the same thing. With the for-profit sector, and we find this throughout worldwide, most often the private sector is more actively in healthcare, with hospitals being run by the private sector. However, recently there have been more and more private sector agencies, private sector for-profit companies involved in human services. And studies on their effectiveness are both mixed as far as how good a job they do. This is what we would like to think happens when we all work together, that we're three good people. This is what usually happens. Or sometimes this is what I think happens, where we all want the same thing, but we tell certain people to go one way and then we say to other people they can't go that way. But when we look at it, oftentimes when the private and public and government sector get together, we all really want the same thing. However, we have to deal with this multitude of different departments and different nonprofits, so that it's very, very hard to get a consistency. And usually the one who makes the decision is the one who has the most money. However, we find a lot of times that the one who has the most money sometimes may not be making the best decision. When we look at government in this partnership, government in America has continued to put more of the emphasis on addressing disability services on the private and the NGO sector. Government is tending to move away from helping people in human services or just marginally getting things done. One statistic of what we deal with is that with autism in America, there are people sometimes waiting as many as 8 years for services because there's just not enough money or people to help. When we look at the NGAs, we all have our own approach and philosophy. So in America and the autism community, we strongly believe that every person with autism is deserving of a life of full opportunity and respect. But others in the autism community may want to find research on how to cure autism. And we often find, because of everyone's belief, there are more agencies addressing parts of autism, but no one agency addresses all of it. In the private sector, what we find is that the private sector will get involved if they can get paid. And the problem with that is that our country, when someone pays for a service, the cost is way more than what the reimbursement for the pay is for. Private sectors have an unfair advantage over the NGAs, and that they're allowed to lobby government, they're allowed to give contributions as private agencies, and they can access government in ways we can't. When we look at autism, we also know that the federal government doesn't really have a strategic effort or a plan like you all are having here with your vision to look and say, what do we want as a nation for everyone? So we all tend to try to argue our own cases of what we want. Government does believe that they should provide safety and maintenance services, but we also know that NGAs agree that we don't have all the answers and we can't do it alone. In our country, we have cases where federal government could change every 4 years because of elections and new presidents, and that oftentimes government money will require NGAs to put up some of the money to get government money or get government support. This may be hard to read if you want, but in 2016, there was $2.45 trillion American dollars spent on human services by government. In state government, there's additional money being spent, and as when you try to work with the intersection of the private and the public sector, state government also changes because of elections, so that when a new governor comes in, he or she may have certain objectives that differ from the past one, and we have to somewhat start all over again. When you look at state government funding in America, and state government is where most of the money is spent directly to help someone, the most money goes to elementary and secondary education, then to public welfare, then to higher education, then to health and hospitals, then for police and the judicial system, and then for highway and roads. But a majority of 21% of its money does go for public welfare. NGAs sometimes are also the problem, but one of the things that's occurring in our nation is more of us are moving toward judging how well we do based upon outcomes and not the numbers we serve. There's a move which I think is very important to say that if you're going to serve a person, how well are you helping that person improve their quality of life? This, of course, is different to read, but with NGAs and particularly the religious community, in America, the religious community is growing in a very good way to help more people in needs. And last year, they received almost 123 billion American dollars in contributions. That's the greatest increase in giving in this partnership tends to be coming to agencies like mine, where people are seeing the need to help others. Also what's happening in America, which I applaud, is that we're seeing more and more people giving to other efforts in other countries. And in 2016, we saw $22 billion from Americans being donated to help causes throughout the world. Does it work? The top picture is one where we try to help it happen, but in reality it works, but it oftentimes is a very difficult map or road to navigate. It could be better, because there's so many people and so many agencies involved, sometimes it doesn't work. It's interesting to go to other countries and see how it's being done here. Our office has been involved with other countries, and the main difference in a lot of other countries are two. One is that the religious community plays a much greater role in other nations than it may so as far as providing services. And the second issue is government in many countries provides a high majority of all the money that is needed to provide social services. I just want to suggest that I know in this country and in other countries, as you work on expanding your efforts, my suggestion to you all is that one alone, government alone, or the nonprofit area alone cannot do it, and that if you could work together, as with government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector, and government, the NGAs in the private sector, things will be much, much better. And I would just tell you, as much as it's difficult, people are getting help, there are changes occurring, but it's a constant balance act. Thank you.
Thank you for saving time. شكرا للورقة الثرية للسيد باديسش. تحدث السيد باديسش عن أدوار الجهات المختلفة في الدولة لدعم ذوي التوحد وأسرهم، وأكد على أن القطاع الحكومي لوحده لا يستطيع أن يكون الكيان الوحيد الذي يساعد الأسر والأفراد ذوي التوحد، فهناك حاجة للقطاع الخاص والجهات غير الحكومية إلى أن يكونوا شركاء مع الحكومة في تلبية احتياجات أسر التوحد والأفراد المصابين به وتقديم الخدمة والدعم لهم. وتضمن العرض أيضاً وصفاً لكيفية مشاركة الحكومات والقطاع الخاص والمنظمات غير الحكومية في عدد من الدول في تقديم أفضل مساعدة لذوي التوحد وأسرهم. كما حدد العرض الأدوار المنوطة بكل منهم والخبرة اللازمة لتطوير نظام شامل للخدمات والدعم، وكذلك الدور المهم الذي تقوم به المؤسسات الدينية في هذه الشراكة. العرض فعلا أوضح المطلوب لتقديم خدمة أفضل لذوي التوحد وكيفية قياس النجاح في الخدمات المقدمة لهم، وكيف نتأكد من أن كل منهم قد كان محل التقدير والاحترام. شكرا سيد باديسش. Thank you very much. المتحدث الثاني الدكتور كولين ألين، رئيس الاتحاد العالمي للصم. الدكتور كولين من ذوي الإعاقة السمعية، وقد استخدم لغة الإشارة الأسترالية منذ ولادته، وأتيحت له الفرصة للنهوض بحقوق الصم والأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة على نطاق واسع لأكثر من 35 عاماً من خلال المشاركة النشطة في مجال الإعاقة على الصعيد السياسي والمهني والاجتماعي. الدكتور كولين حالياً رئيس مجلس إدارة التحالف الدولي للإعاقة، وهو نشط في مجال حقوق الإنسان، ويتجلى ذلك من خلال تمثيل الاتحاد العالمي للصم والتحالف الدولي للإعاقة في اجتماعات لجنة حقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة في جنيف، ومن خلال مشاركات متعددة في المؤتمرات السنوية للدول الأطراف في اتفاقية حقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة واجتماعات الأمم المتحدة المعنية بالإعاقة والتنمية في نيويورك وجنيف. الورقة التي يقدمها اليوم الدكتور كولين بعنوان الوصول الكامل إلى تعليم الصم من خلال لغة الإشارة. تفضل دكتور كولين. بليز دكتور كولين، معك 20 دقيقة.
Talk. Yeah.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'd like to very much thank you for inviting me to present at your very important conference. I represent a couple of organizations, actually. I'm president of the World Federation of the Deaf, WFD, and I'm also the chair of the International Disability Alliance. So I just want to clarify that before we start. My presentation is in relation to the education of deaf children through sign language. And I was listening to the different presentations yesterday about how things are really developing in Saudi Arabia. And I want to congratulate you for working so hard to change the attitude of the population towards people with disabilities. I want to tell you here in this audience that I, as a deaf person, am using sign language, and for people who are blind or have a visual impairment, I am a man, and I'm using sign language, and I'm speaking through 2 female interpreters. And this is important for you to know. As I said, I'm chair of the International Disability Alliance, And we are reflecting the fact that deaf and disabled people can lead. It is time for all of us to change attitudes. We're not poor people with disabilities. You have to change attitude, and you are responsible for changing the attitude of others. We are equal to others in this community. Now, back to my topic. The World Federation of the Deaf, I'm going to focus on that first. The vision of the World Federation of the Deaf is that the whole world will approve the use of sign language to enhance the human rights of those who are deaf in all aspects of life. Education provided through sign language empowers deaf people. It gives us the right to participate in all aspects of life. The World Federation of the Deaf represents 135 countries around the world. We have a congress every 4 years, and we have a board of 11 members. All of the board are deaf. All of them are leaders in their respective countries. And we focus on the promotion of our rights through sign language. So what does that mean? Sign language. We're talking about sign language enabling us to access all aspects of life. It enables us to break down these barriers that we face. And I'll go into that a little more later in relation to the education of deaf children through sign language and the use of sign language interpreters. There are 70 million deaf people around the world. And I'm very, very sad to have to inform you that 80% of deaf children around the world have access to no education. 80%. Only a very few have access to sign language environment in education. Those who do have access to education are very often educated orally without the use of sign language. And there's only 2% have access to education in the first language of children who are deaf. We want to focus on bilingual education, which means sign language and the written language of the country. And if deaf children have education given to them through the use of sign language, then they are enabled to fully participate. And this is scary for us. It frightens us greatly. You leaders who are here at this conference, participants, you have responsibility for deaf children and their rights to access a high-quality education. The UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD, is a very important tool for us people with disabilities. And it focuses on our needs as disabled people. In particular, there are 5 articles that relate to sign language rights. I come from a deaf family. I grew up in a sign language environment. My parents used sign language. My father would sign to me in the house, tell stories. But in the street outside, he wouldn't use sign language, and he wouldn't allow me to sign. It was embarrassing. That was 50 years ago. So our sign language hasn't been recognized for many years, until around the 1980s, when sign language was finally acknowledged formally, linguistically, as the sign language and the rights of people who are deaf. So such a high percentage of people viewed sign language as monkey language. So, as we see, it is not true. The Convention talks about language, the CRPD, and when it was formally adopted in 2006, and I understand that here in Saudi Arabia, you ratified it in 2008, and there are articles, and particularly Article 2, which is very important for deaf people around the world, because it was acknowledged that the UN recognized that sign language was as equal to spoken language. And I want to reinforce that. Sign language, spoken language, are equally valid languages. So for you in the audience, please understand that. There are no differences of status or complexity between signed and spoken language. They are both equally valid. So, you have the human right to learn and acquire the language in your country. The spoken language of your country, Arabic, French, English, Italian, Hungarian. There are so many different languages around the world. And what about sign language? Each country has its own sign language, in parallel to the spoken language of that nation. We have Hungarian Sign Language as a parallel to spoken Hungarian, for example. And deaf children have the right to acquire the sign language of their country. And I totally respect the sign languages of all these different countries around the world. I am tired of hearing, and again over the past few days, people saying, oh, American Sign Language is the best one in the world. Now let's stop that, please. Saudi Sign Language is a beautiful sign language. And people here in Saudi Arabia should respect Saudi Sign Language. There are over 300 more sign languages around the world. It's impossible to use one language. Now, looking at Article 24, it states that we must promote choice in the education of deaf children. And deaf children here in Saudi Arabia should learn Saudi Sign Language, be enabled to acquire Saudi Sign Language. Not import sign languages from other countries. You have a sign language here in Saudi Arabia. As I grew up in Australia, I acquired Australian Sign Language. And Article 24 is an important focus for us. We're talking about deaf and deaf-blind children. And it is a responsibility to ensure that we adjust the environment to fit the needs of those deaf children and enable them to learn. We adjust to enable those deaf children to make the most of their academic and social development through the use of sign language. And I understand very well that the theme of this conference is disability and rehabilitation. And as our previous speaker said, people who have autism can lead in that field. So it's not a situation or a way of, let's cure them. So we share a similar view. Many, many deaf people don't want to be cured. Sign language is a language, and the deaf community has a community. It has its own culture. It has its own heritage, its traditions. And it has many, many wonderful stories to tell you. But I only have 20 minutes. Please respect deaf people. They want to achieve their rights by using sign language. And, as I said, this article is so important for us, and in particular, those teachers who work in a classroom must be qualified in sign language. And how many of you teachers who work in special needs education or schools with deaf children, how many of those teachers don't know sign language or have very basic gestures with these deaf children? How can you educate deaf children in such a way? You must take responsibility as teachers. You have the responsibility to ensure that the child who you are educating is learning. These deaf children can become teachers themselves. So it's very important that teachers are trained how to teach deaf children. And they are taught how to be fluent users of sign language. And in that way, deaf children will have the best possible education. As good as hearing children, as good as children with other disabilities. My final comment about the CRPD is there are now, I think, over 175 countries have ratified the CRPD. That's a huge number. And it gives us, in the deaf community, the sign language community, strength. It empowers us. It energizes us. As I said, there are over 300 different sign languages around the world. And there are only 45 countries who have legally recognized sign language. 45 countries only have recognized sign language. And we must work to increase that number. I don't think the Saudi government has yet formally recognized Saudi Sign Language. And I'm not talking about the unified Arabic Sign Language. I'm talking specifically on the sign language which is indigenous to that particular country. Deaf children have rights. Deaf children have the right to a language, to a culture, to empower them, to develop a strong identity. Today and yesterday, certainly there was a lot of discussion and comments in relation to 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And these development goals are very important keys for you to ensure that those goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, are related to the needs of children with disabilities. And I keep saying this to you again and again. You people with disabilities have rights. You have rights to live in society, not to be excluded. Nothing about us without us. Leave no one behind. And that applies to both women and girls and men and boys. Equally, must be able to participate in their environment. To go back to the SDGs, there is one specific goal about quality of education. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, should be seen in combination with the convention, the CRPD, with this very specific focus on quality of education. And as I keep saying, for us, it's through sign language. Without sign language, we have no education. And I have visited many, many countries around the world. And my heart is broken when I see classrooms, teachers talking to deaf children, and the deaf children are staring into space. They don't understand these mouths moving in front of them. They don't hear anything. You have responsibility to provide quality education to everyone. If you're working with deaf children, you have a responsibility for them and their education.
3 minutes left.
Okay. I'm sorry, taking a little time. I'll jump to end with a very short video to show you the situation of deaf people around the world.
There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals in total. The contribution of you, persons with disabilities, and your families is critical to our work towards realising these goals for you.
Do you know there are an estimated 1 billion persons with disabilities in the world today? Persons with disabilities comprises 15% of the underrepresented in development efforts.
The aim of 2030 agenda is to leave no one behind. It is the first global commitment to development that actually includes persons with disabilities.
Despite our numbers, we are still one of the most marginalized populations in society. But things are slowly changing, and we're here at the meeting of the UN, the high-level political forum, to share information on how you can get involved.
Persons with disabilities and their representatives organization must be consulted along the way. We need to share our knowledge and information, coordinate amongst ourselves, raise awareness on the journey. It won't be always easy, and we will need to build bridges to get there. So here is how you are going to get involved.
At the global level, we have the right to 6 actions or activities. 1, to attend all official meetings of the forum. 2, to have access to all official information and documents. 3, to intervene in official meetings. 4, to submit documents and present written and oral contributions. 5, to make recommendations. 6, to organize side events and roundtables in cooperation with member states and the Secretariat.
Keep your governments accountable by participating in constant dialogues around SDG implementation.
The SDGs are an opportunity. They open doors and break down silos. Now is the time to address the rights of persons with disabilities through a development lens worldwide. The SDGs are realized in your country if all persons with disabilities are lifted out of poverty, have access to universal health care, have the right to participate in inclusive education at all levels, and they also have access to employment with equal access to others. Let's work towards a better future for all.
I want to end my presentation by thanking you for listening to me. I'm sorry I've taken so much time, but for me it is so important that we have the fullest participation for those who are deaf through sign language. And in this way, people can achieve the fullest inclusion in society. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور كولين على هذا العرض القيم. أشار الدكتور كولين في ورقته الوصول الكامل إلى تعليم الصم من خلال لغة الإشارة إلى أن موضوع الصم من الأطفال والبالغين لا يجد الاهتمام الكافي ويواجه تحديات، من أهمها الاعتراف بالأطفال الصم والبالغين الصم كجزء من التنوع البشري. التحدي الثاني إدراك وتعزيز التنوع عالمياً في كل مجتمع من الصم سواء في الدول المتقدمة أو النامية، ومواصلة العمل معاً في مجالات لغة الإشارة ودراسات الصم والتعليم والعمل وإمكانية الوصول والتقنية والصحة وغيرها. كما أشار الدكتور كولين إلى المواثيق الدولية ذات الصلة بدعم حقوق الصم، وبشكل خاص اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة لحقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة وخطة عام 2030 وأهداف التنمية المستدامة. وأشار إلى أن إمكانية الوصول الكامل للصم يكون من خلال لغة الإشارة، وذلك منصوص عليه الآن في التشريعات الدولية، وتعد أفضل دليل للأشخاص الذين يسعون إلى تحسين نوعية الخدمات المقدمة للأطفال الصم والبالغين الصم على المستوى المحلي. كما أشار إلى أهمية أن يجيد المعلمون لغة الإشارة، وأن يكون للمملكة العربية السعودية لغتها الخاصة بها لغة الإشارة. شكراً دكتور كولين. هل الدكتورة سيسيليا معنا؟ الدكتورة سيسيليا سيكالني، أستاذ جامعة بانونيا من المجر، تخصص رياضيات وعلوم الحاسب، فائزة بجائزة الملك سلمان ونبارك لها ذلك. لديها ورقة عمل بعنوان البحث والتطوير في مجال تكنولوجيا المعلومات المساعدة لذوي الإعاقة. You have 20 minutes, please. You have 20 minutes.
Okay, I don't use it. Is this the next? Never mind. Okay, I will use the keyboard. Dear Chairman, dear ladies and gentlemen, I came from Pannonia and my background is mathematician and software engineer. Thank you very much once again the prize. Assalamu alaikum. First, I would like to say you some general information. I show you statistics. I say some words about accessible web design, and I show you some of applications that we have developed. In spite of the fact that Hungary is a small country, we have 1,000 faces. It's important that we have been member of the European Union since May 2004, and we have a very unique language. This is Hungary. This is capital city of Hungary, Budapest, but I'm not work there. I work near the largest sweet water all over the Europe in a neighborhood town, fourth part of the Lake Balaton, in that building. Our university has 5 faculties, and I work for information technology. I have to skip some slides because I have a shortened time, but I would like to emphasize the probability that a person becomes disabled increases with age. Most of us will be concerned in some point of our lives. This statistic is made by the European Union, and it demonstrates that the number of increased people, elderly people, is increasing. The right down corner show you that my grandchildren will be in that age, and there are the newest group of our society. The probability that a person becomes disabled raises with age, and therefore, and of course, they would like to use the internet in elderly years. Therefore, the accessibility of the internet is a crucial question. People who already use the internet will continue to use it when becoming older, as long as it is accessible for them. I'm not joking, but I'm several times the guest as a patient hospitals. Sometimes I'm patient in a hospital, and I always are together with an elderly woman. For example, it has happened recently that one of them, who was over 70 years, was very nervous because she lost $2 on an online playing card game because the internet was very slow. And the other one was over 80 years old, and she always uses online shopping because she is not able to go outside. So it is a key question to develop accessible website. That table shows the different age groups and what the key technology for this generation was regarding their childhood. My generation belongs to the baby boomers. TV was the key technology in my childhood, but the key technology has been for virtual reality and augmented reality from 1998. Maybe you have had some experiences with the newest VR and ER technology, because the key technology, the VR technology is the key technology for the newest generation. Let me see what my motivation and goals was. To develop multimedia and virtual reality-based games for people with some disabilities, and to answer the demands of users in order for a higher standard of living. Developing a virtual environment, serious games, and other software for these target groups is very difficult, complex work, as this figure shows you. The next slide shows you some examples of our work. Unfortunately, I can only demonstrate only a little part of our work because we have time limit. This is a virtual house that is based on the ELA photo series, and we developed it for the Austrian Academy of Sciences in order to teach aphasic patients to speak. This is a virtual hotel that has a glass leaf, and it is for patients who have fear of heights. This virtual underground is for patients who have fear of public transportation. In this virtual classroom, children can practice in order to perform better the real classroom. And I would like to show you some European-funded projects. It is the Game on Extra Time project. And the goal of that project was we have designed and developed around 10 serious games. The project supports people with learning disabilities and additional sensory impairments in getting and keeping a job by helping them to learn via games-based learning skills that will help in their working day. These games help students to learn how to prepare themselves for the working life, dealing with everyday situations at work, money management, traveling independently, and so on. Here you can see some screenshots from that game. The main task isn't to do the shopping. Of course, they get several shopping lists, but the main task is in that game to learn money management, how they have to pay at the cashier. You can imagine that if a child has intellectual disability, sometimes they are not able to count 100, only until 10 on 20. What could you buy in your money if you have only 1 or 2 coins? Nothing. The other European funded project was empowering stroke patients to fight back. The abbreviation is stroke back. The goal of this project was the development of a telemedicine system which supports ambulant rehabilitation at home settings for stroke patients with minimal human intervention. The stroke back system empowers the patient to do more for fast recovery. It provides clinical experts with data has not been available until today. By that, it leads also to a better understanding of stroke recovery process, higher recovery speed, and thus to reduce the healthcare cost while improving patients' quality of life. The key objectives was to develop telemedicine for rehabilitation exercises, continuous monitoring to effect of the exercises normal life situations, integrating of telemedicine rehabilitation and personal health records for improved long-term evaluation of patients' recovery, and providing feedback to healthcare professionals about the effect of the rehabilitation exercises. As you can see on that slide, our task was to develop serious games for the home computer for patients to practice at home. And the movement that was censored by special sensors, and these data were sent to the patient's health record, and the therapist and the doctors could monitor the result of movements anywhere. Here you can see some examples of that serious games. On the left-hand side, you can see an ordinary break the bricks game. The patient has to control with that movement, because the therapist asked us to develop a game to practice that movement, minimum 5 minutes long. But what's important, the therapist needs to install our games to the ability of their patients, and you can see the editor mode on the left down corner. You can edit the speed, the bricks, and so on. You can see a screenshot in the middle of the slide, and this game is the gardener game, and the patient has to do that movement minimum 5 minutes long. And if the patient doesn't able to move or to do that movement in the requested speed, unfortunately the flowers and vegetables don't get enough water. The next game is a birthday game. It is shown on the right-hand part of that slide. And the patient has to do that movement, and that movement helps for the bird to go home, to fly home. Of course, there should be some animals, some enemies in their way, for example, other bird or a high tree and so on. And it is important that the therapist could install that game for the ability of the patients. We made several virtual reality animations for patients, for example, to teach that movements. And you can see a piano keyboard on the right hand of that slide. We developed several, maybe more than 70 animations to practice that final movement. It is a Hungarian system. It was developed one of my MSc undergraduate student. This slide shows you 3 games. You can see pick and save game on the left hand, and The task is here for the patients to save cakes and put them from the basket onto a pot with that movement. You can see another picture in the middle of that slide. It's demonstrate a birthday party, and a patient has to stamp over balloons. I will show you a video about that. On the right-hand corner, you can see the star game, and I hope my video will run. Yeah, you can see over there. It is controlled by Kinect sensor, and the therapist could install that game to the requested movement. Do you understand? Okay. This is the balloon game, if it runs. Okay. The patient has to do that movement with their legs. It's really hard to practice it, minimum 5 minutes long, you can imagine. The next topic is accessible web design. There are several standards all over the world to solve the accessibility of IT. I can state that these standards or legislation are usually based on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I would like to emphasize, if the website of a company isn't accessible, that company will lose a lot of customers. So it's not only it's a financial question for a company. Therefore, I have made some research, and that statistic based on accessibility web design keyword and web site accessibility keyword in the ResearchGate database. So after that, I made some research testing a lot of web pages all over the world. Based on the testing, I have determined a 10-promptly chart of web barrier-free recommendations. It's an interesting topic. I was 10 years old when astronauts were on the moon. Do you know that today's advanced smartphones offer greater computing capacity than the spacecraft had when the moon landing was managed in 1969? Today's children own supercomputers, so the question is, why don't we utilize it? Yeah. I have showed the earlier slide because really almost every child has smartphones in the well-developed countries. These games were developed for Android operating system. And on the left-hand corner, there is the so-called kitten game. It was developed for autistic children to learn daily routine. It's similar like a Tamagotchi. Anyway, a special teacher suggested for us to develop a game. In the middle, there is a chess board. That game teaches the rules of chess. Below it, there is a little color pots. The task is to move every line into the left or right side and to fix it when the same colors are in the left hand or right hand column. So it needs logical skills. Above it, a mathematician game. Using that game, children with intellectual disabilities can practice elementary mathematical tasks, for example, addition, multiplication, and so on. On the right-hand corner, there is another game. Of course, all our games are running on tablets too. So the labyrinth game is a special game. The child has to move their tablet on smartphone in several positions. Using that movement, they are able to go out from the labyrinth. But during the way, they can collect some so-called jewelers. These jewelers contain several letters. These letters are not in the right order, but the child has to put every letter in the right space, and finally they get a word. So it's a very hard task for dyslexic children, you can imagine.
Excuse me.
So,
2 minutes to go. 2 minutes to go.
2 minutes, yeah. On the right-hand corner, there is a car game, and it was developed for a child who is able to use only one hand. So every game is controlled always with two hands. And it was very, very interesting for that child. Our newest project is the Games for Social and Cognitive Competence. The main goal of that project is the development of computer and mobile games with writing and reading skills, the ability to count, and to acquire information communication skills. May I offer you some books? I wrote some useful chapters about color design to make your homepage accessible for color deficient user. The others contain virtual reality researches. You can download them from the internet free. So thank you for your kind attention. Do you have questions? No?
In the end of this session, we will have all the questions. Okay,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I came from the town of Hungarian Queens. It's the castle area. The photo was made in a foggy November day. So our first queen got her crown in our town more than 1,000 years ago. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
شكرا دكتورة سيسيليا. حدثتنا الدكتورة سيسيليا عن نتائج متقدمة للبحث في مجال تقنية المعلومات المساعدة وأهميتها لدعم ذوي الإعاقة. الآن المتحدث الأخير في هذه الجلسة الدكتور ستيفانو فيكاري، أستاذ الطب النفسي للأطفال والعلوم المعرفية، رئيس وحدة الطب النفسي للأطفال قسم العلوم العصبية بمستشفى بامبينو جيسو للأطفال بروما إيطاليا. الدكتور ستيفانو فائز بجائزة الملك سلمان في التربية، سيتحدث عن تطوير الاضطرابات العصبية النمائية. You have 15 minutes, Dr. Stefano?
Not 20.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good morning. It's a privilege for me to be here, having the opportunity to present some of findings from mine and my group. We work in Rome, Italy, in a very huge child pediatrician hospital, and I'm a director of the child psychiatry unit. And in all my career, I dedicated all my career to study developmental neuropsychology. That means how the children develop cognition, language, and other cognitive functions, and especially in a relationship with neurodevelopmental disorders, so intellectual disabilities, ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, dyslexia, and so on. So we produce many. Our results led us to produce books that are not only scientific, but also for general public, just trying to let all the people learn much more about mental development, cognition, and needs for a good development. So I would like to give you some examples about how neuropsychology led us to improve our knowledge about different developmental disorders. And the first is the case of Down syndrome. We know from the study of neuropsychology that Down syndrome usually exhibit better visuospatial abilities than language. Language usually is a little bit compromised, especially in production, in verbal production, more than in comprehension. And also in production, we have usually a dissociation between lexicon that is relatively spared and morphosyntax that usually is impaired. But so now, knowing that visuospatial abilities, for example, are working better than language, we know that gestures could be an alternative to improve communicative abilities in these children. And we know also from studies on memory that the working memory, short-term memory, that is a memory that we use usually when we perform a very complex cognitive task, are usually impaired. And, but the dissociation we found between linguistic and visuospatial abilities concern also this domain. And the visuospatial abilities in working memory are relatively preserved than verbal working memory that usually is impaired. But what is interesting in Down syndrome is what we know about long-term memory, so learning. And we know that usually they have very severe difficulties in declarative memory. That means the memory that we use when we study geography, history, and so on. But they are relatively preserved in implicit learning. So the memory that we achieve when we do by experience, by doing something. And we demonstrate for the first time years ago on this, and we found these particular abilities in Down syndrome people. So we use this type of conclusion also to improve integration of people with Down syndrome and to help them to find a job. For example, you have here example from Italy in McDonald's employers or in hotels. And so they improve a lot the quality of life of people with Down syndrome. We know now that also this type of cognitive organization, Down syndrome, is related to a specific brain organization. So the areas that process memory abilities in Down syndrome are almost different from those that process these abilities in typically developing children. And we described that in several papers of some years ago. So the point is that the genetic alteration that is characteristic of Down syndrome change the brain, and the brain, so modified, works differently in a lot of cognitive abilities. We have also another example concerning the developmental neuropsychology in intellectual disabilities. That is the case of Williams syndrome. Williams syndrome is a rare genetic syndrome. It was described not many years ago, at the beginning of 60s, so it has almost my age, so it's very young disorder. And from the beginning it was described as characterized by intellectual disabilities, a very typical phenotype and behavior. From the beginning, we know that also developmental neuropsychology contributes to understand better how people with Williams syndrome works in cognitive speaking. And we know that the language usually is working better than visuospatial abilities. So we have here the opposite case of Down syndrome. But what is interesting to underline is that there is a dissociation also here about the linguistic abilities. Usually they have a profile in peaks and valleys where some cognitive abilities are relatively preserved and some cognitive abilities are relatively impaired. And with my group, we published books on Williams syndrome in Italy that led to the general population to know much better the syndrome, and so the diagnosis is easier now than 30 years ago. And what also I would like to stress is that the cognitive profiles change across development. So what I'm trying to say is that cognitive organization is different in young children and adolescents. In the slides, we show this issue very clearly. On the left, you have linguistic abilities in Downs and Williams syndrome kids younger than 8 years old. And as you can see, the profile is almost similar. But the profile became very different in adolescence age, you can see on the right, where the Down syndrome profile on language is more clear, more close to what we know very well. So what I'm trying to say is that development change cognitive trajectories in these kids, and this is very important for rehabilitation programs. Also in Williams, we were able to describe the correlation between cognitive abilities and cognitive performances with the activation of special brain regions. And once again, the organization of brain is different because the genetic defect that is characteristic of the syndromes. I think it's also interesting to stress the psychopathological comorbidities that we find in intellectual disabilities. These comorbidities sometimes is not known and underestimated, and so people with intellectual disabilities miss to receive the right cure for their psychiatric disorders. And here I show the case of Williams and Down syndrome, the anxiety and psychosis impact in Williams syndrome population. Since the time is not too much, I would like to move very quickly to another developmental disorder, so that is dyslexia. We study implicit learning also in dyslexia, so the ability to automatize some protocols. We demonstrate specific implicit learning disorders in this population, but above all, and we confirm it in several studies, but above all, we describe the brain region that seems to be responsible of this defect in dyslexic patients, not patients really, in dyslexic people. And we found that in the cerebellum we can find the reason of the difficulties in implicit learning that we describe in the dyslexic people. So we have the idea, and this is a very new topic for us, that we can stimulate some area of the brain to improve reading abilities in dyslexics. So what is exactly what we did with a specific technique that is called TDCS, so is a transcranial direct current stimulation, is a very low amperage of current, a direct current. And what we publish in several papers, in several studies, that stimulating brain with TDCS reading abilities of dyslexic people improve so much. And we have a huge echo about these findings, and also Times dedicated pages to our findings. And now TDCS seems to be very interesting in the future for treat people with dyslexia, and not only. The last 5 minutes I would like to dedicate to autism spectrum disorders. That is another, of course, I think is one of the most one of the disorders with the most impact on social life. As you know, autism spectrum disorder is characterized by specific disorder in social communication abilities and interests that are restricted usually, and we contribute studying genetics in this population. This paper was just published in the last weeks and concerned the genetic analysis of a huge cohort of children with autism spectrum disorder. Excuse me. We are interested about diagnosis early diagnosis in children with autism spectrum disorders, because early diagnosis improve the outcome. And what we organize in Italy is a huge consortium studying a high-risk population. That means the sisters and brothers of children with autism spectrum disorders, because they show a very high risk for develop the disorder. You have to think that autism spectrum disorder concerns around 1% of the general population, but a brother of a kid with autism spectrum disorder has 26% of probabilities to be an autism spectrum disorder kids too. So studying the early development of brothers of children with autism spectrum disorders, we hope to find the first signs of the disorders earlier than 2 years and 3 years old. But about treatment, I want to say something. We know that efficacy of treatments are related to the intensity and the precocity of treatment. So we need to start early, and we need to treat for a long time in a week, for at least 20 hours in a week. So we work on this, and what we know now is that treatment of autistic children needs the involvement of parents and teachers. So we developed some protocols of intervention, starting from ABA or TEACH, but also from parent mediation therapy. And I show you here very quickly the results of a controlled study that we published demonstrating the efficacy of this type of treatment. But I think the future is in parent-mediated therapy, that is a therapy that involves directly parents, especially when the kid is very young, so as soon as the diagnosis was made. And the treatment, this type of therapy, as a goal to improve the abilities of parents to have a relationship with kids and improve their communication abilities. So we performed some studies and we submitted the results because we were able to demonstrate that this type of intervention increased social communication abilities in these kids and reduce emotional and behavioral symptoms. But once again, we are open to use different treatment depending about the severity of the disorders, and I show you here an example of the DDCS, so the brain stimulation in a little girl that was resistant to all different type of treatment in catatonia disorders, and the brain stimulation improved so much her behavior, and we published the results we obtained. So, coming back to the mediated therapy, parent therapy, because it seems very useful also to be applied in poor countries, in low and middle income countries. And we have an experience, we are doing now an experience with a colleague of mine, a dear friend that is here, Giovanni Valeri, in Jordania, and hoping parents to treat directly children with autism spectrum disorders, because, you know, it's impossible in some contexts to use ABA because it's too expensive. And since it's too expensive, well, we think also that we have to support people with intellectual disabilities and autism spectrum disorders, not only with medical aids, but also with social activities. This is our experience in the Rio Olympic Games. We were there with a group of children with autism spectrum disorders, enjoying the activities and following the national team from Italy. So I told you that we think and we believe that autism spectrum disorders needs new treatment and new diagnostic tools that may be sustainable by community, because ADOS, that is the most famous task we use for diagnosis, is very expensive, is not open source task, and ABA is a very expensive treatment. So we need to develop treatment and diagnostic tools that are open access. And so that's why we organize an international consortium. We had the kickoff meeting a few days ago in Rome, just to develop sustainable diagnosis and treatment procedures for autism spectrum disorders. We put together different countries all over the world. We hope that Saudi Arabia may be colored in the next future. And I think in the next months and next years, we would like to be close to other countries to improve the quality of treatment for autistic children. So let me thank, in the last slide, all my units with nursery and psychologists and researchers that work with me every day, and that thanks to them I can present our findings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Stefano. نشكر الدكتور ستيفانو في المتحدث عن الاضطرابات العصبية النمائية. الآن بقي من الوقت القليل، نأخذ 4 مداخلات وبعدين نتيح الفرصة للمتحدثين للرد، وإن تبقى مزيد من الوقت أخذنا مداخلات أخرى. في مداخلات؟ نختم؟ تفضل دكتور.
My question to Dr. Kولين. We are talking about sign language. However, in Saudi Arabia, for example, we have several types of sign languages. What is, from your experience, from also other countries, how we can unify, or is it, let's say, needed to be unified, okay, in a country like Saudi Arabia, to come with one sign language, or doesn't matter if we have more than one sign language?
Okay, thank you. That's a very, very good question, where sometimes we see there are a number of sign languages in a particular country. Recently, I visited Lebanon, and they were explaining a similar situation to that you've outlined in Saudi Arabia. They informed me there are 8 different sign languages in Lebanon, and I was asked the very same question that you've just asked. And my experience, I have to say, is I worked in Albania for a number of years. And in Albania, they also had a number of different sign languages. But there's a good method available to enable those sign languages to meld, if you like. The World Federation of the Deaf and the Finnish Association of the Deaf, with support from the Finnish government, have evolved a way of enabling the deaf community in a particular country. So, for example, here in Saudi Arabia, that the deaf community are enabled to evolve a sign language which is acceptable to deaf people. It's the language of deaf people, and deaf people should lead that work, working in conjunction with professional sign language interpreters. And my answer to your question is yes, there are different sign languages in one country, and it is possible for them to become blended, but you cannot impose a unified structure. What does that mean? In many ways, people think that one word has one sign, and that is wrong. You cannot have one word, one sign equivalency. Because a single spoken word has many different signs attached to it as relates to the grammar of sign language. So it's a very complex discussion, but my reply to you is yes, it is possible to enable that process to happen effectively.
شكرا دكتور علي. Thank you. في مداخلات أخرى أو طيب. I think I will give every speaker 1 minute just to resume. Let's begin with Dr. Scott Badish. If you have just 1 minute to add anything. Okay, thank you. Dr. Kولين, do you want to add anything? في سؤال?
I think there's a question at the front here.
سؤالي هو هنا في السعودية هناك الكثير من مترجمين لغة الإشارة، ولكن بعض المترجمين يذكر أن لغة الإشارة السعودية ضعيفة، بينما لغة الإشارة العربية أقوى وأكثر ثروة لغوية. فيقول بينما أكثر الصم يفضلون لغة الإشارة السعودية، ما هي اللغة المفضلة في هذا الحال؟ هل نختار اللغة اللي يختارها الصم أو اللغة التي يختارها المترجم؟
I'm sorry, colleagues. I'm clearly a popular person on the question front. This is potentially a long answer, but I'm going to try and make it very short. The UN CRPD has an article that refers to sign languages, and it indicates that governments have the responsibility to enable research into sign languages. And you perhaps need, or if people are telling you that your sign language is too weak, let's have some government funding to actually formally analyse the situation. Let's look at the grammar, the linguistic constructs of Saudi Sign Language. Let's see what there is actually there rather than rely on personal opinions. It's impossible to say that another sign language is stronger than this sign language, than Saudi Sign Language. That's a pretty worrying remark. Let's see. Sign language belongs to the people who use it, and the deaf community of Saudi are the people who use it. It's their language. Sign language interpreters are working as interpreters. They aren't responsible for developing sign languages. It's not for them. It is the language of the deaf community. They live in the community. They use this language every day. They use it to communicate. So here in Saudi sign language interpreters maybe work, 2 hours, 3 hours using sign language. How are they the people to decide what is appropriate for your language?
Excuse me, I have my question. My question to... Okay. My question is for Doctor. For using games in treatment, how long it takes for one patient to get evaluated using games in treatment?
Yes, it's for you. ممكن تعيدين السؤال? Can you repeat the question, please?
On average, how long it takes for one patient to get treatment using games?
So I'm a mathematician and software engineer. We developed these games for special therapists, special teachers. Sorry for that, but I cannot answer you. The expert is sitting next to me. So we do as slaves for high experts, for example, a neuropsychologist, a doctor, a special teacher. I don't know. So, sorry for that.
Well, speaking about neurodevelopmental disorders, durational treatment is related to the possibility to obtain changes. So if the treatment changes the abilities of a kid or adolescents, he has a sense to carry on. But if the treatment cannot change, in a very impressive way, the abilities of the kid, I think is useless. So we have always to think a rehabilitation on target, a very clear aims, and we have always to check if we are able or not to get the target.
But I have learned from special teachers, so I can say they're experts. If a child uses our games, their abilities developed higher, not only for example, reading skills, but social skills and so on. Because if you use a virtual reality environment, an immersive environment, you are put in that environment and you can practice a particular task several times in safe. So it is easier for those children or young adults to do everyday tasks in the real life too. This was the experts of special teachers. For example, we developed that money management game. Their skills developed really past. And what is more important, children, but not only children, adult patients, stroke patients, everybody likes to play games. It is independent from your age. Thank you.
نشكر المتحدثين السيد سكوت باديسش، الدكتور كولين ألين، والدكتورة سيسيليا سيكاليني، والدكتور ستيفانو فيكاري، ونكرر الشكر للمنظمين لهذا المؤتمر، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.